This program, of course, is presented by Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the most widely read, widely sold, and respected wrestling magazine in the world today.
This is a Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast. I am your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle. By myself this week with Dan's departure with the current issue of PWI and the last PWI podcast. I find myself without a co-host, at least for now. We're going to look to do something about that in the coming weeks. I'm actually excited about being able to maybe showcase some of the different writers with Pro Wrestling Illustrated on future episodes. So I think for a while, at least, we're going to have kind of some rotating co-hosts. But it's just as well because I do want to keep the this portion of the show relatively brief because we've got as big an interview as we've ever had on the PWI podcast. And honestly, in my 30-something years of being a fan and writing for wrestling publications for about 20 years now, it's the most excited I ever was to interview someone. With the big Year in Wrestling issue coming up, which we're starting to put together now, we do the Achievement Awards, and one award that we pick each year is the Stanley Weston Award. It essentially is a lifetime achievement award that we, over the years, have given to a lot of great names, both with us and those that are no longer here. And this year, we decided to give to somebody who certainly has earned it. He's on my Mount Rushmore of wrestling greats, and there's a pretty good chance he's on yours as well. I'm talking about none other than the Rattlesnake himself, Stone Cold Steve Austin. I had the honor to chat with him by phone for about 45 minutes a few days ago, and we talk about his career. We talk about the wrestling magazines and what they meant to him, both as a fan and coming up in the business. As I explained to him, he is one of 3 people in history to have won the Rookie of the Year award in PWI, and then at the end of his career to go on and win the Stanley Weston Award, the other 2 being Rick Steamboat and Ric Flair. So just an absolute blast. I couldn't have been more excited. I hope that kind of fanboy thing doesn't come through too much in my interview. Then another reason why I'm not going to have a co-host this week, or at least it works out well, is that I've got a whole lot to say about AEW Full Gear, the big pay-per-view show they had Saturday night. Very controversial, very polarizing for a number of reasons, and I want to kind of uninterrupted go into that in just a bit, and I will, especially the 2 main matches of the night, which I think are fascinating in that I can't remember any show that had 2 essentially co-main events that were so different, right? I mean, in my view, kind of showcased the very best and the very worst of pro wrestling back to back. So I'll give my thoughts on that in just a moment. Right now, let me tell you about the latest issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Actually, I'm holding it in my hand. It just arrived in my mailbox today. These plugs are always a lot easier to do when I can actually hold this thing in my hand. And it is another fantastic issue. On the cover, Becky Lynch. She is the number one ranked wrestler in this year's Women's 100, put together by Dan Murphy in one of his last assignments here in the magazine. You can check out his write-up on Becky and 99 other women who are the very best in the sport in this magazine. Also in this issue, we've got Dan's, he was very busy here in his last issue, Dan's interview with Chris Jericho, the AEW champion, still AEW champion after successfully defending it against Cody on Saturday night. You heard that interview in last week's podcast. You can read it now here in the pages of the latest Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine. More AEW, my feature on the AEW WWE war, kind of taking it apart, looking at some of the biggest burning questions about the war, looking at things like, who's got, besides AEW and WWE, who's got skin in this game. Does Shahid Khan really have the commitment to see this through, spend the money that's necessary to keep AEW going and ultimately be successful. What could AEW learn from some past wars that WWE has been involved with, whether it's with Jim Crockett, WCW, TNA, and a lot more. So very proud of this feature I put together. I think it's a real in-depth look at some of the issues that maybe aren't talked about that much in this kind of budding war between AEW and WWE. And also in here, the ballot for the Achievement Awards that I just mentioned. You get a chance to cast your vote for Wrestler of the Year, Match of the Year, Feud of the Year, all of those. I think it's such an interesting year for these things. And just since we put this ballot out, so many more candidates have popped up in my mind that I wonder how they'll do, if they'll show up, if it's too late. But who knows? And anyway, you definitely want to pick up this issue. It is the February 2020 issue, and the way to do that is to go to pwi-online.com. You can pick up the one issue. You can subscribe either to the print edition or the digital edition. The digital edition will get this to you a lot faster than waiting for it to arrive in your mailbox, and certainly faster than looking for it on the newsstand. So either way, you get a big discount over the cover price. Again, the thing to do is go to pwi-online.com. We just came off at the PWI 500. Here's the Women's 100. As I touched on, we've got the awards coming up. So a real busy time for us. I think a string of really terrific issues with a lot of great work from the entire PWI team, and you don't want to miss one issue. So again, what you want to do is go to pwi-online.com. While you've got the computer or your phone open, please follow us on social media at Official PWI on Twitter, on Instagram. You can find us on Facebook. You can kindly leave us a nice review for the podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's iTunes or our pals over at Podbean. We sincerely appreciate your support and your kind reviews. Keep us going here. You could pick up the Pro Wrestling Illustrated t-shirt at prowrestlingtees.com. And what else? That's probably... Why don't you also send us an email here at pwipodcast@outlook.com. And for any other questions, concerns, thoughts about the magazine, you can send those to pwi@kappapublishing.com. All right, let's talk AEW Full Gear briefly before we get to my interview with Steve Austin. I don't want to take up too much time. That said, I've got a whole lot to say about this show, as I did on Twitter on Saturday night, and I was live tweeting the whole show, by and large, getting along with everybody, having some fun with our followers on Twitter, and then Jon Moxley versus Kenny Omega came to the ring, and all hell broke loose in the ring and on Twitter with some of the exchanges I ended up having. Suffice to say, I did not like this match. I thought, and that's an understatement, I hated this match. I made that clear on Twitter. And I thought a lot of the feedback I got in opposition to my views was well-reasoned and respectful, and a lot of it wasn't. But I think very much there is room for differing opinions here and in just about anything having to do with wrestling. That said, I feel really strongly that this match was a big step back for AEW and a real miscalculation. And how, whether you liked it or you didn't like it, I think one thing that is almost can't be argued is that there was a better way to do this match where everybody would have been satisfied. I think kind of the bloodthirsty fans that really, they wanted some kind of, hardcore blood and guts, that kind of thing. I think you could have done this match to satisfy them, while also, I think, doing away with a lot of the criticism about this match. And there was so much to criticize. And it reminds me to some extent of the Hell in a Cell match between Seth Rollins and The Fiend, which I feel like we were just talking about here a couple of weeks ago. And not just in that they were these hardcore matches that really kind of, went pretty far from what we understand a wrestling match to be, but in that they left so much damage in their wake for the personalities involved. And I know some of you will disagree here, but I really think everybody kind of came out looking bad after this match. Different than with Seth Rollins and The Fiend, who I also think were kind of hurt. This was different, but I just don't think you want to be putting out matches where at the end of them, the participants, especially when there's some of your top stars, come out looking worse than they did going in. And I know some people will disagree with me about this, but for Jon Moxley in particular, I think back to that Chris Jericho podcast interview months ago where he was out making his case, very vocally, very boldly about why he disagreed with the creative direction of WWE and the way he was handled there. And he made it clear that going forward, the vision that you're going to see is my vision. You're going to see my Jon Moxley. This was the kind of wrestling I wanted to do, the kind of character I wanted to portray. And that's what it was, and if that's the case, it sort of reminds me of when Vince Russo left WWE 20 years ago, went over to WCW, and what you heard folks in WWE saying about his departure was, well, he's going to be exposed. You're going to see that it wasn't all him. It was Vince Russo, but it was Vince Russo through the filtering and the editing of Vince McMahon and WWE. And I thought some of that kind of came through with Jon Moxley. Whether it's the case or not, I think that's going to be some people's takeaway in that, if this was the Jon Moxley that the former Dean Ambrose wanted to portray in WWE, then WWE was absolutely right to rein him in, because this was just ridiculous. It was bad wrestling. And what's most frustrating is that we know that Jon Moxley is better than this. We've seen him have a bunch of terrific performances since leaving WWE, even in the hardcore style. I mean, I think to that match that he had with Ishii in New Japan with the G1 Climax match where they were laying it in and there was some weapons and stuff, but it never got so far that you were just like, this is ridiculous. And that's was my thought of this match. It just stopped looking like a fight. And whatever you want in your wrestling, whether you prefer the high-flying acrobatics or brawling or whatever, technical submission moves, wherever you're at on that spectrum, I think the one thing that you have to have is that it's got to look like a fight. And I heard people say, well, what do you mean this doesn't look like a fight? They were hitting each other with all these weapons, and clearly they hated each other so much, the broken glass and all that stuff. But stop and think for a moment, not just about the great feuds in wrestling history, but in a time in your life where you've been mad at someone, filled with rage, and you wanted to get your hands on them, whether somebody wronged you or wronged somebody in your family or your spouse. I think we've all had those moments where you just, if I could get my hands on them right now, when you think about those, whether they've happened to you or whether you ever fantasize about it, what is it that you're doing in those? What is it that you want to use? You want to use your hands, your fists. I mean, the idea of that kind of pent up rage is that you just want to unload with someone. If you're going to use a weapon, it's going to be whatever's nearby. Maybe you grab something and that kind of thing. But the thought that Kenny Omega is so enraged and hates Jon Moxley so much and wants to get his hands on him. And so what does he do? He goes to the hardware store and he buys a piece of plywood and about 100 mousetraps. And he brings them back to his house, presumably, and he gets a bunch of super glue or hot glue gun or something, and he carefully glues them all down to this plywood board and then loads it up, brings it over to the arena, puts it under the ring. It's just preposterous. That's got nothing to do with a fight. And the same could be said about the contraption with the barbed wire bed, the barbed wire spider web, is that what they called it? It was just so hokey and cartoony, and yet at the same time repulsive and gross and really kind of unsettling. I mean, when you see the barbed wire actually, ripping these guys' skin and bleeding, it's just kind of gross and unnecessary and dangerous. I mean, I have a real hard time defending this, and I'm surprised that as many fans did, as I heard certainly on Twitter and since then. I mean, I by no means would I claim that, I'm even in the majority. I might be. I don't know. I mean, I think it's fairly evenly split. Clearly, the fans there in the building loved it, and I've certainly said, and I believe, if it works, it works. There's all kinds of stuff, whether it's Joey Ryan's signature move or a bunch of other stuff that I'm not a fan of. If the fans eat it up and they spend their money to see it, and they keep on coming back for it, so far be it for me to tell you that this is not working. So this did apparently work in the arena and to a certain kind of fans, a lot of whom I heard from. But I think this is tough to justify going forward. And again, I think there was a better version of this match. First of all, 40 minutes. I mean, what is this? This is not Flair Steamboat or Omega Okada or Undertaker and Shawn Michaels. There was no reason for this match to go 40 minutes. It was painstakingly long. I mean, and yet self-indulgent is the term that keeps on coming to mind. And in a very kind of indie wrestling way, and I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way, but I remember going to Ring of Honor shows kind of early in their run, and it just seemed like all the wrestlers wanted to get in all their moves, and just every match had to be this epic. And sometimes the match just didn't call for it, and you'd have these main events with near fall after near fall after near fall after near fall, and it would go 45 minutes when really it didn't need to go longer than 15, maybe 20 minutes. And that felt like it here. I mean, 40 minutes of one death-defying spot after another, it raises the bar to an unrealistic level that these guys would be kicking out of these moves as much as they would. And on the subject of Omega, I've talked about how I think this hurt Moxley. I think that's a little more clear. But Omega, too, now you're talking about a guy who, for a number of years, among a certain kind of fan, has been talked about as one of the greatest wrestlers in the world. He was our number one wrestler in the PWI 500 last year, coming off of his series with Okada and his work in New Japan. He has yet to show that in AEW. I think most fans would agree. He's had some good matches. Ironically, the best match he probably had was in AEW was another lights out hardcore match with Joey Janela on AEW Dark some weeks ago. But I feel like it is long past due that we see the Kenny Omega that was supposed to be the biggest signing, and I believe Tony Khan has said that was the single biggest signing that they had when they were putting together AEW. Where is that Kenny Omega? And here he is in the main event of a highly anticipated pay-per-view, the first pay-per-view of the AEW TV era, the Dynamite era, and a big showcase for him, a match that was highly anticipated. And look, I get that there's a lot of people that loved it and thought that it absolutely met or exceeded expectations, but this is not the Kenny Omega that they paid for, right? I mean, and that's one of, I think, the frustrating things for me and for other fans that didn't like it, is just this thought. I mean, if this was Abyss and, I don't know, Necro Butcher. Remember him? Is he still around? I remember him from his hardcore days in Ring of Honor and in The Wrestler with Mickey Rourke. I kept on thinking of him a lot watching this match. There was a reason why those guys adopted the style that they did. And they were really talented in a lot of ways and certainly got over. But, I'll take it a step further. This style of wrestling got popular in the late 90s, early 2000s, coming off of the ECW era. And I'm not talking about the kind of hardcore stuff that ECW did. They did some this to an extent, but when I think of garbage wrestling, and that's what it's called, and that's what Jon Moxley called it at the beginning of the match when he went for his first weapon, garbage wrestling, which is what it's known, I think that was popularized in... and even that is kind of an iffy term because I don't know that it was ever that popular, but certainly there's always been kind of an underground following for this kind of thing. And historically, it appealed to a lot of wrestlers who, frankly, didn't have a whole lot more to offer, right? Not that a lot of super talented wrestlers haven't worked garbage matches, but I remember going to local indie shows in the early 2000s and the late 1990s, and guys who were, didn't have an athletic bone in their body, were not in shape, were not kind of classically trained wrestlers. All of a sudden, they could go into the ring and headline and have some fans cheer for them by doing nothing other than putting their bodies at risk. And you'd have guys who would do the light tubes or staples in their heads or all kinds of other crazy stuff. And again, I'm not saying that there aren't super talented wrestlers who have worked this style in the past, including Jon Moxley, who kind of came up through CZW working the hardcore style, and many, many others, whether you're going to talk about Mick Foley or, everybody's got a hardcore match or two in them in their career, and they can absolutely work. I've seen my share of terrific hardcore matches, but this was to such an extreme. I do think that there is a line between hardcore match, street fight, weapons, whatever, what have you, and garbage match. And this moved into that garbage match, death match, light tubes, exploding barbed wire, ring rope kind of thing. And even if you enjoyed it, my point is Omega and Moxley could have had a better match. Absolutely. I don't have a question in my mind, and maybe they still will. Assuming that maybe the rivalry isn't done, I'd love to see the standard wrestling match between the two of these guys, and I'd love them to show to the world we didn't need to do that. And I know they didn't need to do that. I know that they're better than that. It's really puzzling why they would do that, why Tony Khan would let them do that. I think, I think back to the Dustin Rhodes Cody match from months ago, and for a lot of people, that was their first taste of AEW, and I forget who it was, whether it was Vince McMahon or Triple H or somebody from WWE. The word got out that they dismissed it as like, okay, they just want to do the hardcore stuff because of all the blood in that match. And I think AEW fans, rightfully so, kind of took offense to that, saying, no, that's not at all what AEW is about. So here they are again on another major stage. Again, their first pay-per-view of their TV era, lots of eyes on them. A couple of main event matches at the top that were highly, highly anticipated. And in the main event slot, the final match, what did they deliver? A hardcore match, and that's all. I don't say it's all it was, because I don't want to minimize the effort that those guys almost literally killed themselves, but they beat the heck out of each other, went 40 minutes. It's an incredible feat to put your body on the line and put yourself through that for 40 minutes. But my point is, I don't know if it was worth the return. And my biggest point, again, is that I wasn't buying that this is how two guys that hate each other, that have this bloodlust, this rage, would settle it. When you look at the great grudge matches in wrestling history, and talking to Steve Austin, we talked a little bit about the Bret Hart match. That was kind of the match in WWE that really put him on the map. And you think about the intensity of that feud, and they have the no disqualification submission match at WrestleMania 13. And what did that look like? Do you remember Steve Austin pulling out a plywood board filled with mouse traps or any of the other silly a bag full of glass, all the stuff? No. What did he grab? I remember him grabbing a soda from a fan and hitting Bret with it because it was in reach. And I remember them slamming each other into the turnpost. And most of all, I remember them really laying in those punches and really going at each other. I mean, that looked like and felt like a fight between two guys who really hated each other. What Moxley and Omega put on it was some kind of crazy freak show where, to me, it was less about telling the story about how much they hate each other, and more about just doing these kind of can you top this stunts where the point was just to make people's jaws drop. It was a freak show. It wasn't a wrestling match. And all that said, I get that some people enjoyed it, and I get why they enjoyed it. I do think maybe wrestling as a whole, certainly WWE, has moved so far away from the violence, the blood, that to some extent has always been part of pro wrestling, and while at the same time moving away from it, trying to fill that void with stuff like The Fiend and Seth Rollins, where it's like this illusion of a hardcore match, but they're forget about there not being any blood or blading, but you get these preposterous stunts like the ladder on top of the chair on top of a toolbox, then you hit it with a giant mallet, stuff that is just stupid and just sort of it just looks particularly fake. Now I don't know which is worse, the crazy stunt that looks super fake or the crazy stunt that is real, because it's super dangerous. I mean, and even putting this match aside, the reality is that AEW very much has to pump the brakes on this hardcore stuff. Before we even had this match a few weeks ago, as I mentioned, you had Omega versus Janela in another lights out match that, there was no reason for it. They didn't even have any kind of issue. It wasn't even on TV. It was a dark match. And before that, it was Moxley and Janela in a lights out match. And it gets to be too much. I mean, I think that criticism that came from WWE about AEW just being this hardcore promotion was unfair and unearned, but they're starting to get there. You're starting to wonder if they may have a point. And I say that somewhat facetiously, but AEW very much needs to back off of this. This doesn't need to be their calling card. They've got one of the most talented rosters in the history of any wrestling promotion. And, basically, they're much better than this. Certainly, Kenny Omega and Jon Moxley are better than this. All that said, got to talk about the match right before this. And again, you talk about, polar opposites. I in some ways, never felt better about AEW than coming off of the Cody Jericho match, which I loved. I think I might have liked it more than most people. And because to me, again, what I said before, whatever your tastes are in wrestling, the acrobatic stuff, the hardcore stuff, whatever it is, I think the one thing that's got to be there, wherever you are, is the storytelling. And wrestling at its very, very best, and I feel like this is almost not debatable, wrestling works at its best when you've got two storytellers in the ring, right? And more than what moves are used or how they look or how they're executed, you have to have that narrative weave through the match. What I love about wrestling is when you have that match, Hogan Andre, whatever it is, where the feeling is, I have got to see this fight. You are sold on watching this score be settled. And I think Cody in particular has been the very best purveyor of that kind of feeling of anybody certainly in the United States. And for my money, overall has become just about the best worker in the U.S. And people say, what are you talking about? He can't do what AJ Styles can do or whoever, Kenny Omega can do. But it's not about the moves or the athleticism. Cody works like somebody, and this is absolutely a compliment, but somebody twice as old as him in terms of the wisdom of maximizing everything he does, not just in the ring, but in the build-up to a match. I mean, he really is kind of wise beyond his years, and you see how the crowds react to him. He is the most over guy in that company, doing a lot less than a lot of the people surrounding him. I mean, it's funny that he's part of this clique that includes the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega, and really his style is so much different than theirs. I mean, he is very much of the old school. I mean, absolutely athletic, super talented, but that's not his bread and butter. His bread and butter is just making everything count, bringing out the emotion of him, of his opponent, of fans, and I don't think he ever had that on display more than in this match. You just think about over the last year, though. Nick Aldis, his match with Dustin Rhodes, Shawn Spears. I mean, these are not household names anymore, and he has all of those programs have felt so high stakes, so important. And then obviously into Jericho, fantastic build-up, some of the best promos we've seen in wrestling in years from Cody, building up to this match, and then the fallout of this match and where we're going next. He's going right into another a big program now with MJF. So I just love this match. Everything I said about Cody, I think, goes for Jericho as well. Now, granted, as much as I am putting down the other match for gore, this match had its own share of gore and its own share of a really ill-advised move when Cody dived outside the ring, busted his head open. Look, it absolutely contributed to the match. I'd be lying if I said it didn't. It added to the drama, and you wonder if the story would have worked as well if you didn't have that. And everything building up to MJF throwing in the towel, and I thought so smartly done, because on one hand, it was the worst thing that MJF could do for his friend, right? I mean, you just robbed him of this match. Cody put up the stipulation that if he lost, he would never challenge for the title again. So you robbed him of the opportunity of ever getting a world title shot again in AEW, theoretically. But on the other hand, it was completely defensible. If that is your best friend, as MJF claimed him to be, and you see him in agonizing pain and doesn't look to be in a position where he's going to be able to escape that move, it absolutely makes sense that you would throw in the towel to save your friend. So if I have a criticism of it, and I know other people have brought this up, it would be not about the match, but of the post-match with MJF turning on Cody. It did feel a little rushed. I do think that there was enough of a development in the storyline with Cody and MJF, just him throwing in the towel, that could have unfolded over several weeks, where you were left wondering what were his intentions. What was he really looking out for his friend, or was he trying to screw him over? So again, I feel like that could have been milked over weeks, if not months. But I loved this match. Honestly, for my money, one of the best matches I've seen this year. And, I think it made it that much more disappointed that it was followed up with what we got in Omega and Moxley. All right, that's enough out of me on AEW Full Gear. Obviously, I had some really strong feelings about that show. Thanks for your indulgence. Right now, let's get to the main event of this show. What a thrill for me to be able to talk to this guy. Certainly one of the wrestlers I looked up to coming up, following the business, watching as a fan, and just a huge, huge thrill for me to talk to the latest recipient of the Pro Wrestling Illustrated Stanley Weston Lifetime Achievement Award, Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do this face to face. A big thrill for me to be able to talk to you here on the phone. And we're talking about you being named our Stanley Weston Award winner. It's our annual Lifetime Achievement Award. You know that you are one of 3 people ever to have both won our Rookie of the Year Award and our Lifetime Achievement Award. So it's like the entirety of your career captured by PWI.
When I won that award in 1990, that's a shoot, back in the day, and to get that award. And I was, very fortunate to be in a high-profile angle with Chris Adams, which gave me a lot of television exposure and a lot of notoriety. And, I was just fortunate to come along when I did. And now to get this thing, like you said, full circle, it's pretty dang cool. Who are the other 2 that got Rookie of the Years and then ended up getting this award?
Ric Flair and Rick Steamboat. So it's a pretty good time.
Wow. Yeah, man. I consider Flair the GOAT, and I consider Ricky Steamboat to be the greatest babyface, or him and Ricky Morton, greatest babyface in the history of the business. And also, Ricky Steamboat's one of the best workers ever to lace up a pair. But anyway, it's cool.
And, a hell of an opponent for you. You were probably his last major feud, right before his.
Man, I learned so much working with Ricky, and he just taught me so much, and just his timing. And I love, being as young as I was back in the day, working with Steamboat, and before that, working with a guy named Danny Davis down in Tennessee, who let me call a lot of the matches, and the Hill only had a few months in the business. And then Steamboat, working with Steamboat was like, you realize you don't have to call everything. The other guy just fills in the gaps. And that's one of the things that was so good about Steamboat. He just did something. If you grabbed a headlock, he was going to try to get out of it, like go to a top wrist lock or whatever. So Steamboat was phenomenal.
Yeah. So let me ask you a little bit more about the magazines, both as a fan. I know you grew up a fan of wrestling in a remote area in Texas. How available were the Stanley Weston magazines to you? Were you a fan? Did you collect them? Did you buy them at the newsstand?
Oh, yeah. Well, just growing up in South Texas, I grew up on, Houston Wrestling presented by Paul Bosch down there at Sam Houston Coliseum. And then when I started playing football in Denton at North Texas State, I would go down to the Sportatorium. World Class was still on fire before Jarrett brought them out and turn it into the USWA. And so we'd go out there on Friday nights and watch the live show, and Saturday mornings for the TV tapings, and get drunk and throw stuff at the wrestlers. And hell, it was just a blast. And I started really getting into the magazines about the time I entered the business. Figured that, found they were out there and had some financial means to buy them, working on a freight dock, driving a forklift and loading trucks. And man, I tell you what, when I first broke in, and they just had me down there in World Class Championship Wrestling, and when you made the top 10 in the different organizations, associations, or federations that they named, man, you were on the map. And you would look at all the guys in the top 10, and you look at the top baby faces, or the most hated, the heels. It was just it was a barometer, and you'd hear about these guys. And because things were so regional back then, you might have never seen them because of the territory system. Then all of a sudden you'd cross paths with them, and you'd strike up a conversation. You could actually see their work, because you always wondered, just looking at the magazines, what kind of worker they were. They were a little bit better than you, according to the magazine. What were they doing? So I started really reading all that stuff right when I got into business, because that's where you found out where you were.
Yeah. And you touched on how important being Rookie of the Year was back in 1990. What was that something that could really change your career? How much were promoters noticing stuff like that really put you on the map, and did that help you financially?
No, it didn't help me any financially. I believe I was presented that award, that plaque, which I still have, and it's scratched up because I've moved so many times, but I'll always have that thing. I think I was given that thing in Louisville, Kentucky, backstage, and a couple of guys there took the pictures, and I took my plaque and went on about my business. The territory was down, as Jerry Jarrett would say, and it was. And so, just saying, hey, I'm the Rookie of the Year didn't really open any more doors for me or raise my pay scale. But, between the boys, like I said, it was a shoot, and it was kind of like going to the Hall of Fame or getting this award now. It means something. And it kind of means you've met, a certain criteria or a milestone to get noticed by this magazine, and they're calling you, the standout guy that started for 1990. So it was an honor more than anything. And like, hey man, maybe I'm onto something.
Yeah. Do you remember reading stories about yourself back then? And we're pretty open now about how we did things back then. I mean, you'd make these stories up. I'm sure we quoted you a bunch of times without ever having talked to you back then. Did you get a kick out of it? Was it something that I know some wrestlers are very protective and maybe a little uneasy about having words put in their mouth. Do you have any memories of stuff like that?
Oh, yeah. When I look back at some of the stuff that was written, I just laughed because, when I was working heel, it was all smart aleck type things that fit the character that I was back then as Stunning Steve. And, they'd have, the other legends that were in the business, whether it's Lou Albano or whatever, making a comment about you. And so you'd read some of their comments, or you'd read what PWI said or said you said. And I took it with a grain of salt. And I said, hey, man, they're pretty close to who and what I am. And they're barking up the right tree. So, yeah, I was always cool with it. And nothing they ever did offended me or took me aback or I said, oh, I can't believe they said this about me. It was all, it was a shoot, but you also took it with a grain of salt. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember the first PWI 500 and where you were ranked?
Oh man, that's a great question. I don't remember. Yeah, if you could look it up. I don't remember. Would not make it.
So it was the very first one in 1991. So I guess you're still relatively new in the business, and you came into number 31. That's not bad for your first year on the list.
No, that ain't bad at all. First year on the PWI 500, that's pretty damn good.
Yeah.
And especially when you look there, and some of the guys that are within about 30 or 40 behind you are pretty damn good hands. You know, I think the magazine might have fudged a little bit because I was pretty good. To go back to that, I mean, to be number 31, within, probably 20, 30, 40 spots behind me, might have been some guys that were better than me, but if PWI said I was number 31, then dang it, I was number 31, and I ran with it. I'll never forget when, Booker T always made a big deal about the PWI Top 500. And, when he came to WCW, that was a big running joke or a thing with me and Book about, who was higher on the PWI Top 500. So, yeah, it was always cool.
You were ahead that first year of Eric Embry, Big Van Vader, Inoki.
See what I mean? Those guys are damn good workers. And, Eric Embry, I don't think he got enough credit for some of the stuff that he did. I really enjoyed Eric's work a whole lot and enjoyed him as a booker and a personality.
Yeah, yeah.
And, of course, Inoki and Vader speak for themselves. God rest his soul.
Yeah, sure. So fast forward to 1998, and you are number one in the PWI 500, and then 99 you were also. I think you were the second guy ever to be number one in back-to-back years after Bret Hart, and then John Cena did it again years later. So a very different time in the business when you get into the late 90s, and certainly a different time in your career. Did you feel at the time that the magazines were, helping your case, helping get your name out there and your picture out there? By this time, you're on the cover all the time, probably more than anybody else.
Man, being on the cover of those magazines is a big deal, and don't let anybody tell you that it's not, because it is. And again, that was kind of bragging rights, and you would go through the airports or wherever you're at and saw that magazine, like, hey man, you picked up a couple, passed out to some family members or something. 98, 99 to go number one back to back, and not a whole lot of people had done that. And that really did reflect where I was in the business at that time. So I don't think they were fudging at that time. And if you want to talk technical merits, maybe not so much, but as far as an attraction or a draw, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. And so now you've been retired for a number of years. I don't know if you've realized this, I'm just doing the math in my head. I think you've now not been wrestling as long as you were wrestling. So, because your career, what 90 to 2003, right? So
yes, and remember, there was a period of time where I was off for a C3-4 fusion, and the time where I took my ball and went home. So you can subtract those months out of there, and it wasn't really a 12-year. I mean, it lasted 13 years, but it wasn't really 13 years. Yeah.
So does it feel like it went by in a flash? I mean, as a fan of your work, it kind of does. It's like, where does the time go? Does it feel like it's been so long since we've seen you?
Man, it just seems like in the blink of an eye, it all passed by, and I'll never forget, from bouncing around, hitting those ropes in the sportatorium with Chris Adams and everybody in the wrestling school, and going down the road in Tennessee and starving, getting a break and going to WCW, a stopover in ECW, getting the call and going to Ringmaster, with the WWF at the time, and then coming up with Stone Cold and, getting dropped on my head was a wake-up call, and, getting fused up and all the stuff that happened, and then just time to pull plug and get out of town, after 19 with The Rock. Stayed around, did a little bit of that general manager stuff, but yeah, when you look back now, time sure flies by, and I just hope that all the guys and girls in the business are enjoying it as much as they can. And I always tell these young kids, or the people that are in the business now, write some kind of daily journal. Write down who your opponent was, or what the house was, or where you were, or two or three thoughts that you remembered, or just because I always wanted to do that and I didn't. And, with all those years, the memories kind of fade away. So there's a lot of things about my career that I've forgotten. And, I wish I would have made a little bit better, record of some of the things that I did or milestones. Because when I was riding down the road, I always had, when we were rocking the fanny packs back in the day, I always had a piece of paper and a Sharpie in case I saw a billboard or something or whatever. If I just was, brainstorming, listening to music, coming up with T-shirt ideas, I would always write them down so I wouldn't forget them. So I had all that stuff. But, yeah, I wish I would have journaled, and that sounds kind of weird from a Stone Cold type guy, but documented more of my career. But long story short, without rambling, it flew by like it was shit. It just happened yesterday, and it's gone.
You mentioned being dropped on your neck. When you look back on like pivotal moments in your career, do you think is it the case that more than anything shortened your career? If you could just have that one back, do you think? I don't know if you'd still be wrestling today. You look like you certainly could, but is that the single thing that probably shortened your career more than anything?
Yeah, I mean, yes, definitely, because man, my nerves are starting to get pretty frazzled towards the end. I've still got a lot of neurological damage from that. I wouldn't be wrestling today, at 54, but a lot of people don't understand that when I pulled the plug, and I was 38 years old, and golly, man, at 38. You're really kind of coming into your prime. You have prime years before that, depending on when you start, but you have such an understanding of the business and how it works. To retire that early is that's way too early. I think I could have lasted, speculation, of course, I don't know, 42, 44, and then, finish at a hell of a work rate and then walked away. But, it ended like it did, and that's the way it goes. I look back at it as it would have been cool if it never happened, but it did, and it took me a long time to come to grips with it, but a long time ago I did, and here we are.
Yeah, you say it's unthinkable to be wrestling at 54, but yet you see Undertaker out there, and I think he started before you did, and it's continuing after you, and Triple H is out there at 50. Chris Jericho is one of the hottest names in the business right now. He's coming up on 50. So does that, in your mind, does that speak to just kind of conditioning being better, or what? No,
I just, all I can talk about was just the pace at which I was going, whether in the ring or on the road, living pretty fast, and with the neurological damage, to see those, Taker lace them up every now and then, or Triple H. Hey, man, nothing but respect. Me and Taker were always joking about who's going to last longer, him or me. And, hell, that was before 2003, obviously. And all these years later, he's still around. So he's one of the toughest human beings to ever walk the planet. And, like Jericho, I love what he's doing. Holy cow, that guy's having so much fun. It's unbelievable, and he'll go down as having one of the best runs in the history of the business. But, I think, I'm where I'm at, and I was done in 2003. But to see these guys still going, I don't make any comparisons of them to myself, but, man, I'm proud of them, and I love to see them still out there, doing something that they love or so passionate about.
Yeah. When you hear, now this is the latest kind of big milestone achievement for you, our Stanley Weston Award, but you're in every Hall of Fame. You're always talked about on that Mount Rushmore. Do you, and I guess understanding modesty and all that, do you see yourself that way? And do you think you're one of the best ever, if not the best ever?
I think I was, without a shadow of a doubt, one of, if not the biggest draw in the history of the business. And people will say of the different generations or different territories, other, different names are going to come about. Who did it longer? There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. But during that period, from when I got hot to when I stopped, it was the pinnacle or the zenith of the business. It had never been a more hotter time in the business, and guys were making more money then than they're making now. and the money was absolutely crazy. So yes, I'm on the list of being one of the best to ever do it. Now, I'm not going to compare myself to a Ric Flair or Shawn Michaels or Bret Hart or some of the fantastic workers. I was a damn good worker, but when you put it all together, as far as a package, a gimmick or a character that was called Stone Cold Steve Austin, the things that I did well, and the money that we drew at the houses, yeah, I'm in every conversation that you could have, and that's just the way it is, and that's not bragging, that's just the truth.
What made you different than all of your contemporaries for that time?
I don't know. I just I had an intensity, and I've always believed in intensity in anything you do, and especially in something athletic, kind of a carryover from my football days. And I wasn't the best football player in the world, but I tried real hard. So I guess, I don't know what was different about me. I would say intensity would be one defining thing, but if you line me up against the wall with a bunch of other guys and said, hey, man, pick, a couple of these guys who's going to be the top of the wrestling world one of these days, I don't know that you'd pick me out of a lineup. But, it turns out I jumped off that lineup and ended up doing what I did.
Yeah. What do you think wrestlers today could learn from you and your run? I mean, a lot is made these days about how wrestling is missing that kind of rebellious spirit that you brought to wrestling, and at least on the WWE presentation side, so much of these guys are made to look sort of subservient. I always think to a guy who I know is a big admirer of yours, Kevin Owens, and they did that storyline recently where Shane McMahon fined him, whatever it was, $100,000. And there is Kevin Owens pleading not to be fined, and he even kind of cheats on his behalf during a match where he was a special referee. So just kind of bending over backwards to appease the boss because he didn't want to get hit with this money, this fine. And you heard a lot of people bring up there Steve Austin. Well, Steve Austin would never have done that. It wouldn't matter what the consequences were. He would have just beat the hell out of Shane McMahon. So do you see stuff like that and think like they could use a little more of what I brought to the table those years ago?
Man, I don't know. The current system is so much different than where we were back, when I was active, and those were, the days that we were running, and everybody in that locker room from the Attitude Era, the Monday Night Wars will tell you, it was like the wild, wild west. And you could go out on a limb, you could push an envelope, and we did. And so I think it's just a safer product. And I know Kevin would probably love to do a lot of things, but I guess it's a hard question to answer, and I don't know how to answer it.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you, another thing that I think is one of your legacies is sort of blurring that line between babyface and heel. And all these years later, it seems like, wrestling companies, and maybe WWE in particular, has a hard time creating babyfaces that are still beloved by fans. When you look back on that run that you had, do you see yourself, or do you look back on that and think that was a babyface, or every other role that's put out there, tweener, all that, or did you look at yourself as, when you were again the fan favorite, were you a good guy?
Man, I think I really think when I started out, I was always pretty much a heel, and I was trying to be hated. And coming from South Texas, I had the things that I grew up hearing, and I remember talking so much trash. Vince started editing my lines when we would take Raw into post. And I asked him, I said, man, why are you editing my stuff? I said, you're taking out a lot of my lines. And he said, Steve, quite frankly, you're popping the guys in the truck. Because he wanted me to be a traditional heel. Well, if you can pop the guys in the production truck, you can pop anybody because they've seen and heard anything. And so he goes, and I told him, I said, Vince, you got guys here, 6'10", 7 feet, 320 pounds. I said, if you take my personality from me, I said, I can't compete. But if you give me my personality, I can compete with anybody you got. And he says, okay, Steve. And he stopped editing me. And I started talking all that trash. and people started tripping on it because I ain't never heard nobody talk all that stuff that I was talking, or being from South Texas with a little bit of a Texas accent, and I was laying it down and kicking people's asses. And so it became entertaining, and you had that pivotal match in 13. So I guess the answer to your question, I was trying to be a heel, and being a heel became cool, or I became cool, or I became so entertaining that maybe the baby faces were flatlining because they were trying to be so wholesome, and I didn't give a shit. And I think that don't give a damn attitude, and I got to give Jim Ross a lot of credit for my run. I was the guy doing it, but Jim Ross was able to see the things that I was doing and explain it in a way and talk about me in such a fashion that you had me doing all this stuff, saying all this stuff, and putting on these aggressive physical matches. And the way Jim Ross called it, it worked like we were like peanut butter jelly, and we weren't even planning this. This was the genius of Jim Ross, and I've often wondered where my career would have gone had I been 20 years earlier, like superstar Billy Graham. He could have been the first Stone Cold if Vince Sr. would have known what to do with him. They beat him with Backlund, and then if I had come along sooner, or if I hadn't had Jim Ross to call my matches, how that would have gone, I still would have been fine. But he just had a way of bringing that Stone Cold character so that you could understand him and why he was doing what he was doing, or, by God, that's the Texas rattlesnake. You can't trust him. He brought that character to life, and that's what an announcer's supposed to do. They're supposed to get talent over. Jim Ross damn sure helped me get over.
Yeah. And that's interesting. And you do think about all the stars that aligned, right, for you, whether it was Jim Ross on commentary, Vince McMahon kind of coming out of his shell and becoming a performer, an on-air talent for the first time, and your foil, The Rock being signed around the same time. I mean, both of you, these kind of once-in-a-lifetime acts and coming at the same time. So do you feel that a lot of your run was just kind of, luck, but right place, right time, right circumstances?
Man, yes, and all through my whole life, from coming up and deciding to go to Denton, Texas, right outside of Dallas, rather than New Mexico, where I had another football scholarship. It just seems like every decision I ever made put me in position to be, in the business that I ended up being in, and coming around the right time and traveling down the road with the right guys, feuding with Chris Adams to give me that, early, publicity and notoriety because I was in a major program, and getting me noticed. And so, guys, and also, when you take into consideration that I wasn't supposed to win King of the Ring that year, Hunter was. But after the curtain call in the Garden, I was walking across the parking lot one day in Lowell, Mass, or somewhere, and Vince says, "Hey, Steve, you got a minute?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "I just want to let you know in 2 weeks you win the King of the Ring." I said, "All right." Anyway, so we go to King of the Ring. Mark Merrow kicks me in the mouth. I go to the hospital. Jake gets a promo. Doc Hendricks comes and tells me about the promo. The idea for Austin 316 pops into my head. Also, because Stone Cold Said So was dropped that night because I needed a button to pro. So, man, when you look at it all, I always tell everybody it was a lot of damn hard work, but a lot of it was a fluke, and a lot of it was just a lot of hard work, and I was busting my ass, and after 7.5 years, it seemed like I was an overnight sensation.
Yeah. You touched on it before, how important it was that Vince McMahon didn't edit what you said, and that you were able to go out there and just be yourself. I asked you before what wrestlers could learn today from you. I mean, do you think that's one of the things? I mean, it's certainly one of the big criticisms of the current product is that they are scripted so closely. It is hard to see the real personality in guys. I mean, do you think that would make a difference today?
Well, I just, you feel like when you watch that, those old Monday Night Raws, those Nitro openings, man, those shows opened hot. That's Pyro and Jim Ross screaming at the top of his lungs about what was about to happen. And then all of a sudden, here comes somebody out of the gate, whether it's me or anybody else, there was the point I'm trying to make is there was a sense of urgency, and it feels like maybe the sense of urgency is missing, and wins and losses, well, they do matter, and the booking that matters. So I don't know. It's a tough question. I think you really got to be yourself, or be someone that's so far away from you, but be totally committed to that character, so that people think it is you. You look at the Undertaker. Look at the run he had. Man, who would have figured that character, that gimmick would have lasted as long as it did? But had they put that on anybody else, I don't know if they could have pulled it off like Martin did. So I don't know. I guess I'm rambling because I don't know how to answer your question.
No, I think that's a good answer. Another one that comes to mind is Kane, right? I mean, you talk about somebody being so different than the real person, and you see this guy now holding public office and just a soft-spoken, smart guy, and made his bones, I guess, being the complete opposite of that, this maniacal monster that you had a good run with him, too.
Well, man, I always enjoyed working with Kane. And, when he came in as Isaac Yankem and some of that other stuff they did with him, it was terrible. God dang. He was just made to be, the brother of The Undertaker, Paul Bearer, spinning that story, and here he comes, and he happens to be damn near just the same height as Undertaker, jacked up, put the mask on him in the red. Oh, man. I remember when Undertaker debuted, it wasn't that one Survivor Series. People were just scared to death of that guy. And then here comes Kane a few years later. And, when they worked the brother gimmick or the brother angle, you're like, come on, man. But this was so good, and both those guys were so good and committed to the characters. Like, hey, man, even if you know the business is work, you're having a hard time believing that the brothers, you're believing that these guys are brothers because the story is so good and the guys are so good. So that was those two awesome talents, and Kane knocked it out of the park.
Yeah. It's so clear that you're still such a fan of wrestling, which is one of the most interesting things. I listen to your podcast all the time, and that's the other thing that I think is really unique about somebody who reached the heights that you did, still watching, and not just watching, checking in for WrestleMania, but clearly you're well versed on every level, different products, different promotions. I know some of it is your work and your podcasting. You got to stay, up to speed. But are you still a fan? I mean, if you didn't have to anymore for anything, would you still be watching wrestling regularly?
Yeah, I mean, because I don't really consider my podcast a wrestling podcast. I don't even know what it is anymore. I just do it, whether I'm talking to someone from wrestling or just shooting the breeze. I love wrestling because, growing up in South Texas, when I first was changing the channels at 7 or 8 years old with my mother, she's sitting over reading her magazine. And this is back when you had to change the channels by hand. And I came across Houston wrestling, and just two guys in that smoke-filled arena. I was hooked. And so it's one of the things, although I'm not doing it anymore, it's one of the things that I love more than anything. And I just you want to watch, because it's like, when you watch, there's a match. I'll send this. If this is a cell phone, I'll send it to you. There's a match. You can look it up on YouTube. It's just a match from 1977 in the Sam Houston Coliseum between Terry Funk and Harley Race. And it's a 2 out of 3 falls match. And they go 40 minutes. Paul Bosch is doing the commentary. And when you look at the craftsmanship, you look at the workmanship that's done in that ring, Funk starts bleeding, at the 33-minute mark, something like that. You can't tell how, when, or where, or what Terry starts bleeding. And it's just seamless work. And Terry's doing these just go for a slam, but Harley's pressing up off his shoulder, so it's turning into an overhead press. And just the bumps that Harley takes. There's only 2 high spots in the whole match. So when you watch it, the workmanship, and this is a classic style match from 77, so obviously times have changed, but my point is the workmanship in the ring. That's the holy grail, man. Like David Copperfield, if you start seeing holes in his tricks, you ain't going to go to his shows. So you just, I don't really watch for storylines anymore. I know the business is faster paced and guys are doing, and gals are doing a lot more athletic stuff. But you just want to watch to make sure that the work is preserved or maintained at a high level. And when you're cranking out a lot of talent, from a PC or whatever it is, not everybody's seasoned enough to have those kind of matches because it takes a long while to really learn the craft. So anyway, and today is hurry up theater. Do something or else they're going to change the channel on you. So you watch all the changes and you just think someone's going to come back and start working like this, and they're going to get over, and they're going to get over big time.
Well, I think.
But anyway, regardless, I love to watch because I'm still the fan that I was at 7 or 8.
So when you see something like the Young Bucks out there or the Lucha Brothers, can you appreciate it, or are you there like sitting there like the old timer thinking back to those Terry Funk matches from 40-something years ago and just shaking your head?
From both.
Yeah.
From both. I'm able to, at once, just suspend my disbelief, buy in, and just go for the ride. And on the other hand, as an armchair quarterback who, did what I did, I could pick it apart. But I don't choose to harp on the negative or try to pick things apart. I want to enjoy them for what they are because I can't live in a time capsule. Times have changed. The business has changed, and I get that. I'm more of a fan of the older school stuff, but man, some of the creativity, that the Bucks and the Lucha Brothers, that's their opponent over in AEW, right? Pentagon and Phoenix.
Yep.
Yeah, love those guys. So when they had a couple of those tag matches they've been having on those pay-per-views, or watch Kenny Omega does some of the things. Well, watching Jericho, kind of. I don't want to say reinvent, but I will. Man, just go out there and cut those promos and all that stuff that he's doing. And Chris is old school. He got over in every territory he was in. He's the top guy over at AEW. Cody's doing good. It's fun to watch. It's fun to watch Chris Jericho. It's fun to watch Kurt Product. But I like that hardcore Smash Mouth style. And if I want to see that, I'll get on YouTube and I'll go watch a Brody Hansen match from New Japan or All Japan, whatever it was, and watch them beat the trash out of somebody, or watch them and the Funks over there wrestling. So I could still watch that old stuff.
I think there still are some of those purveyors of that older style. And you mentioned Cody, and I think he's doing some of it, and in the middle of all the craziness of the Bucks and all that in AEW, you see the matches that Cody's had, and they've been largely story based, and that match. I'm sure you saw the match with him and his brother from back Memorial Day weekend. That was, there was not a whole lot of big death defying moves, but a lot of blood, a lot of emotion. What did you think of that?
Well, as I talked about on the podcast, that was the most emotional finish or match that I'd been invested in years because of the story they told. And the story was 33 years in the making because Cody's 33 and his brother's 50, and his dad, God rest his soul, one of the greatest of all time, died at 72, I guess. So you're talking about all these years of this being in his family business, and the story that they told. What I loved about it was, there's more athletic guys on the card. So tell the great story, tell the story of two brothers who are feuding or trying to be, whatever, just trying to gain respect or whatever it was. But yeah, that was just a smart way to work that match, and barring kind of moves or tools from each other's toolbox and using them against each other. Phenomenal building of the match. Of course, the color was spot on because of, Dustin's history with the blade, Dusty's history with the blade. And me and Dustin used to go out there and saw our heads off down there every night in WCW. And if you hadn't had that blood, that was a key part of that match. But they put in a great body of work and told an outstanding story. And the promo from Cody at the end saying he didn't need a opponent, or he needed his brother back. So just A+ from top to bottom. I love that match.
Agreed. Yeah, it's probably my favorite match of the year. I'd be interested in what you thought. Have you checked out the new NWA products? I mean, again, for guys maybe a little more old school than others, That's certainly a throwback.
No, I was talking with X-Pac or somebody else about that the other day on the phone, and they told me it was on YouTube. So I have yet to check it out because I've been busy just running back and forth to Nevada from LA and getting working on a project. But I will check it out, and I'll get back with you on that. Let you know what I think.
Yeah. No, I would be curious because it's a lot, a promo based, it's a studio setting, no music for the wrestlers. It's very much a throwback, but with things being so fast paced these days, it kind of works. It's like a nice change of pace. But anyway, Steve, thank you so much. This is a real honor. Again, congratulations. Certainly well earned for a guy who has done so much. I was in the building in Safeco Field, what is it now, 16 years ago, for you and The Rock, your last match. And I know people talk about Mania 17 a lot as one of the greats of all time, but that WrestleMania 19 match, certainly my favorite of the three, in part because of what we were just talking about, the story, the emotion. I mean, I think of that visual of The Rock whispering in your ear on the mat there. I'd be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to ask you, what did he say?
Oh, he goes, man, I just want to let you know I love you, brother.
Yeah.
And I was laying there. I said, man, I love you too. He goes, I appreciate you. And he patted me or whatever it did, and he got on his way and got out of there. And it was cool because, Rock gave me the ring. He won the match. But he gave me the ring because he knew it was my send-off. And not everybody in the arena did know that. Maybe some of them picked it up just because of the way things were going down towards the end. But, there was only a few people, in the company that knew that was going to be the last one. And so, yeah, it was – I watched that match a while back and did a podcast about it. And it was better than I remembered. I know we could have done better, but it was a really solid match. And, I was proud of it. And I was proud to headline 3 WrestleManias with The Rock and one of my favorite opponents of all time. And, he just brought out the best in me, and I brought out the best in him. And it's very rare to – have 2 baby faces, share a locker room that was so damn hot and not have any issues. That's, he was doing his thing, I was doing mine, and we were running kind of a parallel type course. Because in many ways, as bold and brash as his character was, there were some similarities there, but obviously total different presentation. And he had a great run. So, but that's what he told me, and I wouldn't want to. Whether you put it in there or not, when I think about my, back at some of the opponents that I had, Bret Hart picking me up for Survivor Series in the Garden for his comeback match, and, my feud with Vince, which you mentioned earlier, which that transcended the business and became water cooler talk and drew many people to the business. So Vince was one of my greatest opponents of all time, and that guy, he just working against him or working with him is just like a whole different experience because he is fully committed 120% in, just like I am. And when he was working heel and I was red hot or white hot as Stone Cold, people hated his ass. And he was such a showman out there, not coordinated to save his life, but what a showman. And that's what a lot of people get carried away with is trying to be a great athlete. You don't have to be a great athlete to be a great entertainer, because Vince was a piss poor athlete, but he was, I wouldn't go so far to say piss poor. You know what I mean? He was clunky.
The worst.
God dang. He was phenomenal in the ring as far as his selling, his facials, his emotions, his promos, because in his promos, he's the one that knew where everything was going. And he knew how to make people mad, and he was outstanding at it. So I got to give him credit as being one of my greatest opponents of all time, with all the rest of the guys I worked with.
When you think of it, not to drag this on too long, but when you look back on, your run, this Hall of Fame legendary run, is it all concentrated in your time in WWE, or are there highlights from WCW? Do you just see WCW as something you kind of were passing through? Or do you consider among some of the biggest, best, most important moments of your career, whether it's Steamboat or the Dangerous Alliance or anything, working with Flair, anything from back then?
Well, I was passing through. But as I was passing through, all the names you mentioned, starting off, with Gary Young and USWA when I was riding with him and picking his brain, and Dutch Mantell and Tennessee and Danny Davis, and watching Flair and emulating Flair because everybody wanted to be Flair. Nobody more so than myself. And then, getting dropped on my head changed the style. But to go back to just, the other stuff was paying dues, passing through, picking it up, turning it into a mechanic, putting the psychology together, but missing the gimmick, missing the character. Getting to the WWF, nailing the character after having picked up the mechanics and the psychology, then I was ready to go. Same way was Savage. When Savage started off with those IWC, wherever it was at, and then he came through Tennessee, and he was already the Macho Man Randy Savage, and he could work his ass off, and all of a sudden Vince sees that, bam, by the time he goes over to New York, and they give him the green light, Savage is over like Rover because he's been around, he's done it all. He's paid his dues. He was a working son of a bitch. The character was premier. He just needed the rocket pack. Vince strapped it on him, and there they go. So it was one of those things. And I don't compare myself to Savage. He's one of my favorites of all time. So, yeah, man, I was passing through, but I was picking it up and going to school and working. And, God dang, man, there's something, too, when you're going out there working and you're not on a guarantee – mister, you better learn how to draw some money or get over because, living on $15 and $20 a night gets old real quick. But we did, or I did, and that's what we were doing. And I was always appreciative of, the way things would turn many years down the road. And I'll never forget that, flying so high as I did at Stone Cold and the crowds and the money and all the cool stuff. I enjoyed starving and paying my dues just as much as, selling out the Garden every time I went there. Well, everywhere we went, every night of the week was sold out. Mm-hmm. So, and those were great times. Yeah. But I enjoyed paying my dues as much as the great times. But that's all I got, man. I'll ramble all day long with you. I talk about the wrestling business, and I'm like a kid in a candy store. I just love it. I don't like to talk about myself a whole lot, but yeah, I did pretty good, and so I'm happy to receive this award.
Yeah, you did it right for yourself. Yeah, I used to go to all those Garden shows during the down period of WWF in the mid-'90s, and the routine was me and my buddy would show up 5 minutes before showtime, buy a couple tickets, go inside, no problem. And I remember, I think it was January of '98, showed up before the Garden, before the show started at the box office, looked to buy 2 tickets. They told me sold out. And I was like, what? Sold out? It was unthinkable at the time. And you were on top at the time. And to me, that really spelled what a change there was at that time. It was unthinkable that you could not get a ticket for Madison Square Garden, but it spoke to how
yeah, it was a pretty cool time. And the thing about the Garden was cool because, everybody knew that Vince was going to come down to that show because Garden meant everything to Vince. And that was our backyard, so that's kind of our stomping grounds. And so, when the old man would show up, it might have been a house show, but it was a real important house show. And, the Garden's special, as you know. So all the guys are, really working their ass off. And not that we weren't every night, but it was a trip.
Yeah. Well, Steve, again, thank you so much for taking all this time. I really appreciate it. Congratulations, and very much well-deserved.
Hey, man, I sure appreciate it. And again, man, the stuff from PWI, sometimes you take stuff with a grain of salt, but the PWI stuff is, like I said, man, it's a shoot to us. So I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Have a good one, man. Take care.
Take care, man. Bye-bye.